Hello there, this is Dr. Adidayo Alugo from St. John Cap. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Here at St. John Cap, I empower youth mental health by providing education to parents, teachers, and caregivers. I'm the host of the Walking on Eggshells with Dr. Tulu podcast, where I help parents of kids who have a chronic health condition to manage their own emotional health. I also provide emotional health awareness information to kids using the Emotional Ambassador program. So today I have Dr. Sadaf Lodhi with me. I'm going to get her to introduce herself. Today we're going to be discussing a very important topic, improving relationships by starting with ourselves, starting with me. So I'm going to get her to introduce herself and then we'll jump right into the conversation. If you're catching this as a replay, please hashtag replay and be sure to like, share, subscribe, and just share with your network. Thank you. So, Dr. Lodi, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to get you to introduce yourself to us.
Hi, well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Dr. Alugo. My name is Dr. Sadaf Lodhi, and I am a board certified OBGYN that's practicing in the States here. And I am also a sex and intimacy coach that focuses on helping women empower themselves and via establishing sexual confidence so that they can find more pleasure in their relationships.
Great. It's great to have you here. So now I'm going to talk about women because I mean, most of the parents that really follow us or listen to this podcasts are the women. So I'm wondering, are there common things that affect women, from getting the best from relationships, whether intimate or distant relationships? What are the common barriers?
Sure. Absolutely. So, one of the most common challenges that women have, generally speaking, in terms of feeling, let's say, empowered just in their intimate relationships, is that their thoughts that they have are surrounding intimacy, whether it's physical intimacy or emotional intimacy. It's our thoughts that keep us back. They hold us back. And so if we think about it, we know, and you're a psychiatrist, so you know all about cognitive behavioral therapy. But for those people that don't know, we know that, it's our thoughts that result into our emotions and our feelings, and then those create the actions. And so oftentimes what I see and what clients come to me for are their thoughts around intimacy, and sometimes women find that it's embarrassing or that it's wrong or shameful or something like that. And so those thoughts inhibit them from establishing or having a more satisfying relationship with their partner or spouse. And oftentimes we know that women are just so busy with even just household chores and with children that they find sex to be just another thing, or even just relationships, right? So the physical intimacy comes later. It's just establishing that relationship, that intimacy with their partner. And we find that that is often placed on the back burner, especially if they're taking care of children, and especially children that may have a chronic disease. I myself have a child that has cerebral palsy. And so I know and I understand what it can be to take care of a child that has a chronic illness or something that they're born with. And so it does take a lot of energy. And so when you yourself are depleted, you just don't have that, that energy to engage in something more than just taking care of yourself, right? So it's hard to put forth that energy and that effort that it takes to build a relationship that you feel secure and confident and comfortable in.
Exactly. I'm so much about women caring for themselves because you can only give what you have. And just like if you're on a plane and they keep telling you, put on your own mask first before you help your child. So if you're caring for a child with a chronic health condition and you're not really filling your own cup, then really you can't give a lot to that child. And that's why it's important to have these conversations. And thank you for that answer. So I'm wondering, are these challenges more common in women from an ethnic minority or who have particular religious backgrounds?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I've noticed is that women that tend to grow up, well, to be fair though, I will say that most communities and even society at large doesn't really feel comfortable talking about intimate relationships or physical intimacy, and that a lot of communities that say are perhaps more conservative, will definitely not talk about the conversation about sex and or intimate relationships, and really about relationships. So how do we get past that, right? Oftentimes women find that it's dirty, wrong, shameful, and or they're not experienced and they just don't feel comfortable with their bodies. They may have grown up with sex negativity, and then those thoughts get ingrained and then lead women to avoid situations where they might feel vulnerable, or even result in something that's called vaginismus, where, if for some of your listeners that don't know what that is, that's a condition where and the muscles around the vagina tighten up in anticipation of some type of penetration. It can just be either a physical exam, it can be a tampon, it can be penile vaginal intercourse, it can be any of those things. And so a lot of times our thoughts are what are creating our behaviors. And so if we have a lot of those negative thoughts, they'll result in negative behaviors. And what I've also found is that a lot of it has to do with giving yourself permission. So if you give yourself permission to find out about how to increase intimacy with your partner or your spouse, right? If you give yourself permission to learn about things that will improve your relationship with not only yourself, but with your family and with others, then you can go ahead and go on that journey. But oftentimes it's women or us or individuals that hold themselves back and don't give ourselves the permission. And so we stay stuck in that mentality of thinking that, physical intimacy is wrong.
Well, I like the that phrase, giving yourself permission. I think that's really where it starts from, not just what your
Yeah.
society thinks, but
Yeah.
those barriers are so ingrained that we don't even give ourselves permission to,
Yeah.
to even allow ourselves to experience things fully. So, what are some of the strategies we can use to be unstuck, to give ourselves permission? Where do we start from?
Right, absolutely. Well, I think the first thing to do, right, is to even realize, just even acknowledge that we have a certain mindset. Oftentimes, when you talk to people who are so set in their ways, they don't even acknowledge that, that there's a problem, right? And I think in psychiatry, perhaps, you may also see that is that the first step is always to see that there is a problem, or but then I should step back a little bit and say that not everyone sees it as a problem, right? We have people that are asexual, that don't have any desire and don't see it as a problem. There are people that are demisexual that only start to have sexual thoughts after they establish an emotional connection with another person. Otherwise, they don't feel attracted to that person just based on looks. And so if it's not a problem for you, then it's not a problem. But for those people that consider, for example, low libido or low desire or something like that to be a problem, then it's to acknowledge first that there is an issue there and then to go ahead and seek help. So I think that's the first step. The second thing I would do is accepting and loving yourself as you are now, right? And I think that that in itself is sometimes so difficult for people to do. We're always so critical with ourselves. And then when we are so critical with ourselves and unhappy, then we tend to spill that over into our other relationships. So I think what's important is to show yourself kindness and compassion first. It's also to accept yourself and love yourself as you are right now. I think also that realizing that love and intimacy will look different as we age is also really important. Oftentimes women say that they are experiencing decreased desire, or they don't think that there's any spontaneity, and then they think back to the time when perhaps when they were younger and they were in a new relationship and everything seemed so new, and there's tons of spontaneity. But you have to remember that even with that relationship at that time, when you were to go out on a date, you planned it, you thought about it for days, right? You thought about what you were going to wear, where you were going to go eat, what you were going to do, how you were going to look, would you get your hair done? Would you get your makeup done? All those things, right? So there was a bit of planning, although it may have seemed spontaneous. So as we now fast forward into the future, and we're with a long-term spouse, those kind of things, the spontaneity seems to have dwindled. And, when we say, oh, set up a date night, oftentimes people will be like, oh, well, that's not spontaneous. That takes away the romance. But it actually doesn't. If you have something to look forward to, if you plan it, that actually can create that desire and that anticipation that you may feel that you want, that you need. Also, writing down what you want, I think communication is so, so important in any relationship. And there have been multiple studies that have shown that the number one indicator of whether or not women are satisfied in their relationships is communication. So that's why communication is so, so important, because, you know, we haven't gotten to the point yet where people can read our minds, right? So it's important for us to tell them what we want. And when we are able to fully communicate what we want, then we definitely will be more happy. Also, making time, like I said, for, that sexual relationship that you want with your partner, creating date nights, making it, scheduling it into your calendar. I think that, when we are busy in work, oftentimes family takes a backseat. We don't create that time, we don't create that space for them. And then I feel that it's not only our family that loses out, but we also miss out on that relationship that we want, but we just don't take the time to develop. And
Wow. Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, and then, intimacy doesn't have to be physical, right? We know that. Intimacy can be any of the small gestures. It can be just holding hands. It can be doing activities together. It can be cooking together. It can even be just sharing, just looking at into your partner's eyes. And they say for like 6 minutes, 2 to 6 minutes, just to create that little bit of discomfort, right? So when you're staring at somebody, they'll look at you and be like, why are you staring at me? Right. But it creates that emotional intimacy. It creates that vulnerability that you need to create that deeper connection between your spouse or your partner.
Wow, those are great nudges. I've just taken a couple of notes. I'm just going to try and recap just for somebody who's just catching this broadcast later on. So you said accepting yourself, looking after your own emotional health, accepting that there's a problem, identifying there's a problem, accepting yourself, accepting the changes that come with age, planning. Sometimes spontaneity isn't really practical. So planning it, having date nights, communicating, writing down what you want, non-physical intimacy. So the little gestures that also bring us closer to our partners. So those are some of the strategies, and those are great, great tips. So I'm wondering, for somebody with a girl child who's trying to raise a child to be body positive, but also to be conservative or to be safe, how do you approach that, and where's the balance?
Absolutely, 100%. So I think this is such a great question, because I feel that a lot of us don't know how to navigate that space, right? So I think what's important is to empower our children through education. We have to start by knowing and understanding what our own thoughts are around sex, and then how those thoughts are serving us. If they're negative, then do we want to become more positive? And if we do, how do we go about changing that? And how do we become unbiased and maybe even neutral? Right? Kids are much smarter than we were at their age. And the average age for first exposure to porn is actually 11 years old. I mean, that is so young. So personally, I think that it's never too early to speak to your children about their bodies and create that sex positivity. You don't have to have like the sex talk with them at 5 years of age, but what you should do is at least, speak about the parts of the body without judgment and labeling them correctly, naming the anatomical part by the name, so that, God forbid, if there's any type of molestation or abuse that occurs, your child is going to know how to ask you for help, and they'll be able to tell you the exact body part that was, perhaps touched or violated or whatever. But that's why it's important to use the proper terminology so that your children are empowered to have that vocabulary so that they can share if there's any type of problems that arise or come up as they are getting older. Also, it's very important for us to make sure that when we talk about the changes that happen through life, that we don't pathologize it, right? We don't make it out to be a problem. Instead, we talk about the awe and the beauty of the body and how the different changes in life happen and how it allows us to grow and to learn about ourselves. And I think that if we're given information and we provide that information for our children as they get older, I really don't believe it's going to encourage them to have sex. I believe that it will just empower them to have agency over their own sexuality.
Wow, those are great tips. And I didn't even think of that aspect of looking for help with their violated. But you're right, really, labeling the body parts so that they know, if they need to talk to a trusted adult. That's very important information because it can be a really difficult one for parents to navigate. So those tips are very helpful. So for a woman who's kind of been held back, who's from a culture where it's a taboo to talk about, sexual feelings or intimacy or, there's a lot of body shaming, how can she seek help? How do we move things forward?
Right, absolutely. Well, like like we talked about before, the first thing is to know that there is a problem, and if you feel like there's a problem, you had to acknowledge that, right? And so also then I think what they should do is seek out a provider or perhaps so there's definitely sex therapists, there are sex coaches, I'm a coach. There are definitely people out there that can help them to uncover the root problem or what they may consider a problem, right? So not everyone thinks it's a problem, but if somebody is having that sex negativity and they actually want to seek help and want to change those thoughts from negative to positive, then they should definitely seek out a provider, therapist, a psychiatrist, or a coach, somebody that can help them move forward to whatever their goals are and help them to change their thoughts so that those thoughts change from a negative thought to a positive thought regarding sex. And then that'll create a certain emotion, which will then lead to an action that's more in line with what their values are and what they hold important.
Great. That's fantastic. So you mentioned that you're a coach. I know you're based in New York. So where can we find you if we're looking to follow you and
Sure.
your services and all of that?
Absolutely. So I'm on TikTok and Instagram at Dr. Sadaf OBGYN. That's DRSADAF OBGYN. And then also I have a website. It's www.drsadaf.com. So those are probably the easiest ways to get in touch with me. I also have a podcast called the Muslim Sex Podcast, where I talk to.
Can you spell that for me? I'm just going to put it on the screen.
Sure, it's MUSLIM, Muslim Sex Podcast. So 3 words. And I believe I'm on episode 60 now. So I've been doing podcasts for the past year, and you can go there and see all of the different positions that I've had on there. I've had intimacy coaches, I've had psychiatrists, I've had infertility specialists, I've had a lactation consultant on. I talk about everything obstetrics and gynecology and everything in between. We talk about relationships, we talk about different aspects of coaching. So it's all there. You can find it on YouTube under Muslim Sex Podcast, or you can find it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Okay, great. That's fantastic. Thank you so, so much. Before I let you go, do you have any last word of advice for any woman or, parent who's struggling in this area?
Absolutely. So just like what you said, one of the most important things is giving yourself permission to experience pleasure in all your relationships. It's important for us to prioritize ourselves as we prioritize our families and our children. And I'd like to leave your listeners with ways to increase intimacy. So as we know, there's 4 different types of intimacy. There's experiential, intellectual, emotional, and sexual. So with intellectual intimacy, we talk about communicating your likes, your wants, your desires, and through exchange of ideas or discussion. For experiential, we talk about creating time and prioritizing each other. So for example, creating those date nights, creating experiences together and doing activities together, even just taking a walk outside and holding hands together. that can be great in creating that intimacy. Of course, we have that physical intimacy, right? So that is the one that takes place, and you find that deeper connection with your spouse. You have your emotional intimacy, which is basically establishing trust in your relationship through honesty and sharing your innermost feelings or form of spiritual connection. And then, of course, you always want to show appreciation, whether it's doing small gestures, making breakfast, buying flowers, whatever it is. It could just be even just sharing a hug or a cuddle on the couch, any of those things that create a bond between you and your spouse. We know that spending time together can be more challenging, especially when you're dealing with children that may have a chronic illness, but we know that's definitely very important. And like I said before, you can take a walk, you can have dinner together, you can make a meal together, anything that allows you to focus and spend time with that individual person without other distractions, right? So you put away your phone, you turn off the laptop, you turn off all the other distractions. And so you're only focusing on your partner and practicing mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is just the act of focusing on the present without any type of judgment. And it can be great just to get some clarity in your day. So you can start by journaling and beginning your day with journaling and being present with your partner. And practicing mindfulness when you're with them, it will definitely increase your arousal and desire, but also your connection with your spouse and your partner so that the time you spend together can be more meaningful.
Wow, thank you very much for those tips. This has been a blockbuster session. There's
Yeah.
so much packed into this couple of minutes. So, if you're catching this broadcast, please share it with your network. Provide comment in the feedback in the comment section. Please come back and like, share, subscribe. Follow me on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook. Follow Dr. Sadaf as well. Share the information, because information is power, and the more knowledge we have, the better our lives turn out at the end of the day. So thank you very much, Dr. Sadaf, for joining us today. I really appreciate this, and hopefully I can have you back again, because I'm sure we still have loads to talk about. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you and all that you are doing. So thank you so much for having me on. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.